Day, morning, week when we have a chat with our resident analyst, Mighty Jamie, and he's going to unpack the week that was and make sense of some of the biggest stories that played out across the continent and beyond. And we begin in Chad, but let's say good morning to Mighty Jamie. Good morning, top of the morning to you.
Good morning, Peter. Good morning to the listeners and the viewers. Pleasure to be on the show.
Fantastic. I hope you celebrated women on Women's Day.
Yes, I did. And someone said we should give them money. So I gave all the women in my life some money, Peter,
Good
following
man.
that advice.
Good man. Good man. So, not such good news for Chad's former Prime Minister and opposition leader, Success Masra. I'm not sure if it's Success or Success. I'm not sure with these French names. He's been sentenced to 20 years in prison for allegedly spreading racist and xenophobic messages that incited violence. What do you make of this? Former Prime Minister, is it political or is he a criminal for real?
Well, Peter, we'll have to wait and see what body of evidence the government can present and make an assessment on that, because we can't exclude the fact that he could be a criminal for real and that it could be a coincidence or a convergence of interests that the former, prime minister, even if it was for a short period of time, is somebody who also has been participating in illegal activity in the country. However, my inclination and thinking right now is that this is more political than it is something which is of a criminal nature. The leadership of Chad for decades has been some version of autocratic rule. This traces back to the early 1960s with Hissène Habre, I think it was. And if you consider the fact that even the father of Idris Deby was, running the country in a dictatorial fashion, and the son came in and is continuing to run the country in a dictatorial fashion. It does seem as if this country, as things stand right now, has no path towards democracy. In as much as I've given benefit of the doubt in that maybe the former prime minister did commit some of the things he's alleged to have committed, the reality is that right now, what we are seeing with the son is he is continuing to consolidate power, to work with the military, to act in ways that a typical African dictator would. And considering the history of Chad and the way that this country has basically seen transitions of power mostly through violence than through democratic elections and normal transitions of power, I actually think that this is just a consolidation effort by the leader of Chad. And, ever since the discovery of oil in 2003, Chad really has not seen the kind of progress in terms of redistribution of wealth that they thought they would see. And if you look at where it stands on the Human Development Index, it's very low. People are going through a lot in terms of suffering and struggling on the ground. And as things stand right now, Peter, it looks as if that will continue because the elites and the political establishment is all based around this political dictatorship, but not necessarily a democratic process. And I think they are going to be further from a democratic process as a result of this. And perhaps what we'll probably see is more organizing in the diaspora, because they have large communities within the UK, within France, within America even, and they may continue to try to support resistance and opposition movements, but this is a major blow to any path to democracy, really.
And talking about danger to democracy, Ivory Coast, thousands protesting in Abidjan after the exclusion of key opposition figures, including former President Laurent Gbagbo and ex-Credit Suisse CEO Tidjane Thiam from October's presidential election. It is the same theme playing out over and over again. If you want to win an election, start with the opposition, ban them, stop them from running.
Yeah, fundamentally, that's what we're seeing here. Now, when you go through some of the candidates, you can have perhaps some concerns about Laurent Gbagbo and his leadership style and his appetite almost for courting violence and electoral, contestation, in the sense that if he loses, he never agrees to have lost. So when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, do we really want Lauren Gbagbo to be running? And I thought to myself, no, we don't. But as long as he's allowed to run, he should be able to run. He was taken to the ICC and all of that, and he was exonerated for any crimes that he was alleged to have committed. So as things stand, he is somebody who can legitimately run. And the fact that he has been excluded and other candidates who had a better prospect of contesting have been excluded just shows to us that Ouattara is interested, the president now, in maintaining and consolidating power. So we're going on to a fourth term, basically, is what we're going to see with Ivory Coast. This is it's in line with the same
Mm,
theme, and it reflects, I think, a conversation which is happening across Africa about the democratic regression, and how we are seeing more and more African nations taking these types of strategies, but it looks as if the people are not fully buying into this approach. The protests in and of themselves, if there is some, I guess, international support or backing of their, genuine concerns, could lead to maybe a backtracking of sorts. But I don't know. I think there are lessons that were learned from Senegal. And the lessons for a dictator would be that don't cave in to the protesters, no matter what you
mm,
do, and you have to see it through if you exclude somebody. But it looks as if the people themselves are frustrated with these decisions, which is why we're seeing the type of protests that we're seeing. We'll probably see them escalate much more going into the October period. But it definitely is something that is underhanded to exclude all of your political rivals, after having removed term limits. All of that just suggests that this is a dictatorial approach to leadership. This is somebody consolidating power. This has got nothing to do with the people, but more to do with just selfish
mm,
leadership. We've seen it also in Cameroon. It's a problem, and I don't know how Africa is going to deal with this, because sometimes when we talk about these things, I just sometimes think, about the people in Ivory Coast who are really at the bottom of the economic barrel, who are really thinking about that politicians can help them change something about
mm,
their lives, because some of these institutional changes need political leadership, but they don't seem to be anywhere closer, as things stand right now. And I don't know how we resolve that, continentally, because our institutions at the African Union level sometimes are found sleeping on the job or sleeping at the wheel. And it's quite unfortunate that we can have two different stories about two different African leaders behaving in the same way. Actually, three, if you add what's happening in Cameroon, and all of that is never going to allow their people to see a democratic dividend, so to
mm.
speak.
So let's move to the Democratic Republic of Congo. President Felix Tshisekedi has reshuffled his cabinet, bringing in two opposition figures and reassigning several ministers in a cabinet reshuffle. Former Prime Minister Adolphe Muzito was appointed Vice Prime Minister and Budget Minister, whilst opposition leader Floribert Anzuluni was named the head of the regional integration. What do you make of this move? Does this sound like a genuine bid for political inclusivity, or is this a tactical move to try and neutralize the opposition before the 2028 election?
Yeah, Peter, it is an interesting development. And, it just made me think about the GNU in South Africa, and how the ANC oftentimes has tried to manage this current um, period that it's in by bringing in the voices from the outside who could be their challengers, and giving them some assignments and giving them some tasks, and then hoping that that will be enough. We don't know if the GNU bet will pay off for the ANC right now, and this new GNU that has been formed there in the DRC, time will tell whether it will actually be able to deliver Philip Tshisekedi's hopes and aspirations of managing his opponents. Looking at some of these appointments, opposition leader Anzuluni being appointed into regional integration. The question then becomes regional integration with whom? Because if we're talking about Rwanda, we're talking about Uganda and some of those countries, it may be a harder task for him to accomplish than it seems. And also then he may be being put in place there so that they can blame him for all of the problems that then materialize or play out. We're still trying to see whether there can be a peace deal that lasts between the M23 rebels and the army of the DRC in and of itself. So as things stand right now, this challenge of regional integration, I think, is a big one, because are we also talking about DRC and the parts that have been captured by the M23 rebels? Is he being appointed to do that, to give that kind of a task to an opposition leader? Seems to me either to be a setup for failure or just a way of managing him, or maybe there's an understanding that he already has a relationship with some of the people on the other side, and maybe you'll be able to do so. There's an election coming up in 2028. It's still a little bit of a long way off, but we are getting closer to the time. And perhaps this is some forward thinking, some forward planning in terms of how to keep the momentum on his side. But I don't know if he has as much momentum as he would like, because we've seen this whole year that the narratives coming out of the politics of DRC have been, mineral deals being signed with the Americans, peace deals being signed with Rwanda, and we've seen a re-emergence of old politicians seeming to be challenging Tshisekedi indirectly. So he may not be in a position right now at the political elite level to consolidate power in the way that he would like. And also, as we know, there are perennial problems happening at the ordinary citizen level, and those also may lead to protests as we get closer to the elections, lead to other people throwing in their names in the hat. And it remains to be seen whether Tshisekedi can keep his position as president going into the next election. But this was quite an interesting development, Peter, in and of itself.
So, in South Africa, the Minister of Arts, Culture, under fire for things that he said 10 years ago. Racist comments alleged. Can he survive? Can he keep his job? I guess it's a really difficult one for President Ramaphosa in trying to keep his GNU together.
It was quite a bizarre thing to observe, because the way this started is that he was complaining about something that had been said by young men on a podcast about the colored community in South Africa, which is a recognized ethnic group in South Africa. And as he was pursuing justice for his community, people then started looking at him, and it turned out that he was living in a glass house with a glass jaw and very vulnerable to criticism and scrutiny, because everything that he said between 2010 and even more recently 2016, 2015 seemed to be quite offensive. It seems as if he didn't have the foresight to go back and delete some of his comments, which could be viewed as problematic, racist, sexist, and some of the comments even seem to intimate that him and his colleague, his deputy leader, used to actually take advantage of drunk women. So everything that he tweeted was quite worrying in terms of coming from a person who's now occupying such a senior position as Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture. It is a significant ministry which deals with significant and prominent, figures, and as such, people would be concerned if such a person who has uttered all of these expressions should actually be in that position. So President Ramaphosa finds himself in a very tough position, because while the tweets are old, there's now precedent for removing people from parliament and even from senior positions as a result of problematic statements that they made. And then at just a leadership level, how do you then work with somebody who has expressed some of the things that he has said about Africans, that they smell, that he has said so much that is just generally offensive and racist. So it will be interesting to see how President Ramaphosa navigates this, because he still needs the votes within that coalition, and that is Gayton McKenzie's leverage. But his colleague is also in trouble because of associations with criminals in the underworld. It may be a time for President Ramaphosa to cut his losses, but I don't know if you will, Peter.
My goodness. We've run out of time, but will the national dialogue kick off on Friday?
It looks like it will kick off by force, by fire, by force, but I think it has lost a lot of momentum because of the withdrawal of these significant foundations, which represent key figures, historic South Africans as well as living South Africans. The withdrawal of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation is a major blow to something which was already lacking credibility on the streets and in the public, because they said, why would we pay so much money for a Zoom conversation that we can have? And so I think it will start. President Ramaphosa will try to save face, but I think this will be a blow, and it may very well be a mortal blow. We may never see the second stage next year, which was supposed to be next year, Peter.
Jamie, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much. Have a great week ahead, my brother.
You too. And to all the listeners, have a great week.
That's our resident analyst, Mighty Jamie, who unpacks the week that was and making sense of all the stories that are significant across the continent there for us. It's 6:30 and a bit, and it's time for your news headline.